Hey everyone, welcome to the I303 podcast with your host David Prieto. Here, I share my ingenious insights and oddball opinions from the perspective of an IO. And for those of you that don't know what IO is, it stands for Industrial and Organizational Psychology, which essentially is the psychology of work. So here, we identify different phenomenon and see how psychological principles can be applied, adapted, or utilized to make the workplace either a better or worse place. So today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the Battle of the Bobs, specifically looking at Bob Iger versus Bob Chapek, both of whom worked for the Disney Corporation. For those of you that don't know, Bob Chapek was recently hired as the successor to Bob Iger, and I want to say he lasted in the position for about 10 months. As that time started to work through, and as Disney progressed towards Phase 3, Phase 4, through their Marvel Cinematic Universe, the decision was made almost overnight. So essentially, think about it from Chapek's perspective. Friday night, he goes to sleep, he's the CEO of Disney. Saturday night, he wakes up, he's still the CEO. Goes to bed that night, he's probably thinking, man, I have a great job, work for one of the most well-known companies in all of the world. We create content that is consumed in multiple languages, have theme parks in multiple parts of the world. I'm living good. And my contract was just renewed for an additional, I think it was 3 years. So he's sitting pretty, he's comfortable, he's thinking he's going to wake up the next morning and be able to slap hands, say high five to Mickey Mouse, and continue working as a CEO of Disney. Goes to sleep that night. Wakes up Sunday morning, Bob Iger coming in smoking hot, swinging in like he's George of the Jungle, talking about, comes in and does it, and just takes his spot right back from Bob Chapek. And if you're Disney, you got to be wondering, okay, something was happening. Something encouraged us to decide we're going to move forward with Bob Chapek as a successor to Bob Iger. He was in the workplace, he wasn't performing up to snuff, and so they decided to bring Bob Iger back. Now, if I'm Disney and I'm their board of directors, or if I'm their stakeholders or an investor in the company, I'm starting to wonder, okay, what was happening during the hiring process that led Disney to select Bob Chapek as the successor? What indicators or what data informed the hiring committee to move forward and make that decision? Now, from an IO, there are some best practices that can be utilized and leveraged in making sure we're making the right hiring decisions. There's something called a job analysis, which essentially is a systematic evaluation trying to identify what are the critical characteristics needed to be successful on the job. So the first question I would ask Disney, if I were part of the board, or if I were an investor, unfortunately I haven't made enough money to be able to invest in them yet, but I'm hoping with the help of my listeners I soon can be. With that put aside, what was the criteria used to hire Bob Chapek? I really wonder. Did they just come in and did Bob Chapek essentially just say, hey, I'm here, I know what it takes to do well, you should hire me? Did they look at his track record? Did they look at where did he come from? I'm not sure what information or what data they used in making that hiring decision, but from the outside looking in, I'm not sure if they engaged in taking that first step, which was essentially conducting a job analysis. Again, trying to identify the critical knowledge, skills, abilities, competencies, or behaviors needed to be successful on the job. That should have been step one, and that should have been very clear, and they should have gone ahead and done it. But they didn't. So, after completing a job analysis, there can be different kinds of criteria that are brought to light when making hiring decisions. And so for me, the analogy that I like to use in making hiring decisions is that it really boils down to 3 big buckets or 3 big sets of criteria. You want to make sure you hire for the right head, heart, and hands. Now, what does that mean when we're hiring for the head? For the head. So typically what that is cognitive ability. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Cognitive ability is subject to bias. There are different interpretations of it. There are multiple levels of intelligence. All of that may be true. And I'm not necessarily saying that one form of intelligence is better than the other. What I am saying is that by conducting a job analysis, we're able to identify the type of cognitive ability that would lead individuals to being most successful while on the job. And so conducting the job analysis lets you know specifically what that is. More often than not, in the workplace, that's just raw cognitive power. And so it would necessarily be probably individuals who score high on a cognitive test. Not saying they have to be a genius or have to be Einstein level of IQ, but they should score higher when delivering some kind of IQ or cognitive ability test. Not necessarily saying they have to be, 2 or 3 standard deviations above the mean, but they do have to score somewhat above the average score. The reason I say that is, for the most part, to be a CEO, you have to have relatively, not high, but higher cognitive ability to be able to evaluate data, review information, develop a strategy, and to be able to have high cognitive processing power. So the first part of hiring for the head, heart, and hands is looking at the head and making sure someone's cognitive ability is up to par and up to snuff. So the first question I would ask Disney is, what kind of cognitive assessment was delivered? What were the results? Were multiple individuals considered? So from a hiring perspective, we would lean towards hiring somebody who has higher cognitive ability. But as I shared earlier, there are 3 critical aspects that need to be taken into consideration. So the head is only 1/3. The second part, head, heart. So the heart is the personality. Does someone's personality, does it jive with the expectations of Disney? Now, I'm not saying there's one personality type that is fundamentally more critical to the success of being a CEO, but conducting the job analysis identifies the personality type, which would increase the probability of somebody succeeding at Disney. So I would ask the individuals who are part of the hiring board who selected Bob Chapek, what kind of personality assessment was delivered? And what is the personality we found of Chapek? And does it jive with the expectations that we feel somebody needs to have to succeed in this role? Now, there are 2 broad buckets, or 2 big personality types that we find in most CEOs. We have the more extroverted ones who are very vocal, very animated, very out there. So probably the gold star when it comes to that CEO personality type would probably be Steve Jobs. Someone who is not afraid to speak their mind, not afraid to be vocal, essentially not afraid to be the center of attention. So there's that big overarching personality type. On the flip side, you have the more introverted CEOs, somebody who is maybe not the center or is not the spotlight, but who's still able to navigate and succeed and able to align well with the personality type that fits a particular organization. And there are a couple of CEOs on this side who may not be as extroverted, but their approach fits well with their organization. The one that comes to mind is not Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett. So Warren Buffett is more of that introverted, more of that soft-spoken, more of that I don't necessarily have to be in the spotlight to move things forward, but I am a successful CEO who knows how to manage a business, a multi-billion-dollar business. So going back to looking at it from a Disney perspective, they should have identified the overarching personality type that would have jived well for a CEO to run their particular company. Now, the question I have is, what were Chapek's results? And do they align with the expectations set forth by Disney? I don't know, but I'd like to know. Now let's move on to the last part. So we talked about the head, or cognitive ability. We talked about the heart, or the personality. Now we're going to talk about the hands, or the competencies, knowledge, skills, and abilities that are needed to be effective in the job. So I would ask Disney, what assessments or what hiring processes did you engage in to evaluate the competencies or KSAs of Bob Chapek? How do we know he has the skill set, background, and abilities to be able to succeed on the job? For me, what I have done in the past and what I would like to see if Disney did is engage in what's called an assessment center. And essentially what that is, it's embedding multiple assessments within a hiring process to be able to have multiple perspectives and evaluate multiple competencies or multiple skills to make a holistic perspective on the probability that someone will succeed on the job. So an analogy I like to use to help clarify is the NFL Combine. So there, they look at multiple data points to be able to not necessarily guarantee, but increase the probability that they're going to be making the appropriate hiring decision when hiring NFL athletes. So they have a sprint, they have an agility test, they have a strength test, and they used to deliver an IQ test, but they no longer do that. It was called the Wonderlic, and they decided, I think it was a few years back, to essentially stop administering that assessment as part of the overall assessment of the NFL Combine. There's some back and forth in terms of whether that was a good decision or not, and part of the reasoning behind why they wanted to retire the Wonderlic, but that is no longer used as a cognitive ability test. And so the question I have next is, what kind of assessments did they utilize? Did they have Chapek essentially read some kind of P&L statements? Did they have them review the performance of underperforming staff members? What did they do? That I don't know. So with all of that in mind, going back to the beginning, in order to identify what are the characteristics needed to be successful on the job, the first one to look at, or the first thing to do, is to conduct a job analysis. And in conducting that job analysis, we start to identify what are the critical characteristics needed to be successful. Those critical characteristics can vary, but for the most part, they fall into three really big buckets. They fall into the heart, head, and hands. When we talk about the heart, we're talking about personality. When we're talking about the head, we're talking about cognitive ability. And we talk about the hands, we're talking about the competencies, knowledge, skills, and abilities, or behaviors needed to be successful. So this goes out to you, Disney. I'm really curious to know what factors you took into consideration in making this hiring decision. What assessments did you utilize in evaluating those three big buckets? And had you done so, would you have been able to make a more effective, a more robust, or a longer lasting hiring decision? Would Phase 4 turned out the way it did? I don't know. But I'm excited to see where the path moving forward goes for Disney, and I'm interested and curious to see how far Bob Iger can take Disney now that he's come back. So going back to Bob Iger, he's had some interesting milestones during his tenure working with Disney. I know one of the big ones from my perspective is he made the decision to go ahead and move forward and buy Pixar. This was when he and Steve Jobs were having robust conversations. Steve Jobs was just getting this off the ground and rolling. And he liked what Bob Iger, he liked what he was seeing, and he made the decision to move forward and buy that. Not only did he move forward in considering and buying Pixar, but he also decided to go Thanos mode and start buying other huge media conglomerates as well. I know he also decided to purchase Fox and all the Marvel characters that came with them. Another thing he decided to purchase was, or get off the ground and running, was Disney Plus. And all of that was under his belt, under his watch, and he was able to dramatically improve the performance of Disney overall as an organization. He essentially was setting it up on a silver platter to ideally hand off to Bob Chapek. Bob Chapek comes in, and that's when Phase 4 starts rolling out. That's when we start getting some of the Disney Plus shows, which aren't necessarily the most entertaining. I mean, I did have a chance to watch Loki, which was pretty good. WandaVision was pretty good. I got about 2 episodes in of, oh man, what's that one? The Night Owl? No, that's not right. What was it called? Essentially, the one with the Guatemalan actor, Poe Dameron. Can't remember his, Oscar Isaac. So I watched the first 2 episodes of that one. Not necessarily the most entertaining, but it was okay. Didn't get a chance to check out The Winter Soldier, and I saw the first episode of She-Hulk, and I was out. I recognized right away, this show is not for me. And all of those shows were under the watch of Bob Chapek. Not only that, but also the well, maybe this isn't a knock on him, but the release of Black Widow onto the Disney Plus platform was also under his watch. What Chapek was responsible for was the media fallout that happened between Scarlett Johansson and Disney, where she was upset she was not going to get her bonus or her extra pay based on how that movie was supposed to do in theaters. Because it was released straight to Disney Plus, a big part of her bonus was cut out as a result of it. And I know that led to a pretty bad falling out between Disney and ScarJo. Little side note, I still can't believe Ryan Reynolds, that dude is a monster. He's gone through a who's who of, everybody up until now who he's married with, and I forget her name, Blake Lively. But that dude had ScarJo, and he had a couple others. Deadpool is killing it. Anyways, back to the topic at hand. So Chapek, Disney Plus, had a couple of issues. Another big issue is what was going on in Florida with DeSantis and how Disney was positioning itself to continue to be a tax haven in Florida. They were having a kerfuffle, and Chapek, rather than voicing his opinions or saying more, he decided to stay silent. And I think a lot of activists and a lot of individuals who value what was happening in Florida were expecting Disney, and Chapek in particular, to voice some kind of opinion, some kind of thoughts, some kind of insights into what he and the organization at large were considering. And he remained silent. And that was another knock on Chapek. So going all the way back to the job analysis, all the way back to the head, heart, and hands. Did Disney utilize the correct assessments in making that hiring decision? I don't know. I think the results speak for themselves, though. Issues with Disney, issues with Disney Plus, issues with government officials, and I think that's when essentially Disney came in and decided to share, Chapek, you're not going to be here Sunday night or Monday morning. But we did sign an extension of your contract, and we decided to go ahead and hire you and pay you out anyways. So, is it all doom and gloom for Chapek? Not necessarily. He had a nice departing gift, and I'm curious to see where Iger takes Disney moving forward. One of the troubling first steps that he did was to cut jobs, and I think he's still considering cutting even more. Not necessarily the best start, but I'm interested in seeing where he pushes Disney moving forward. I did read the other day also that he's considering slowing down some of the production that's taking place with Marvel, and that he wants to make sure he's valuing quality over quantity. And I think that may have been an issue with Chapek, especially with him coming from more of a Disney Parks background. I'm not sure if he was as focused or as excited about the idea of creating content. I know under him, another Chapek that is, another issue that kind of irked me is that he started to charge for the Fast Pass at Disneyland. I thought, come on, man. Is he just going to start doing that? Just start to nickel and dime consumers? And I think it was $25 a ride. Don't quote me. It's been a while since I've been to Disney. But I was thinking, that's a lot of money, especially if you're the average family making the average income. How likely are they to go to Disneyland? And is Chapek purposefully overpricing the price of their theme parks to make sure it becomes unaffordable to individuals? I wasn't exactly sure where he's trying to position Disney, but that's something that was under his watch. Iger came in and he realized, okay, we're exponentially overcharging for individuals to take part in our parks. And so I think one of the things on his to-do list is also to look at the price and try to make it something that's more reasonable so that the average family can have a good time and enjoy everything Disney has to offer. So if I were to speak with Disney, and if I were to speak with their board members, I'd really want to know more in terms of how did they know Chapek was the right person? What steps did they take in making this hiring decision? What vendors, assessments, or approaches did they use in developing this hiring process? Were multiple candidates considered? And if so, how did they perform during the selection process? Another thing I forgot to mention is that a job analysis looks at the head, heart, and hands, and it should be a nice mix of all three in making the hiring decision. can't rely overly on somebody who's too cognitive, too emotional, or their skill set is there, but the other two aren't. So it should be a nice balance, and a balance that fits well with the company and fits well with the organization. So I'm curious to learn more in terms of what that criteria is. All right. I think that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you again for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you.